exam techniques, we are going to have a debrief on a 3-hour paper that was given to you for solving, and also in general discuss exam techniques and what are the key pitfalls to avoid, the key good practices, significant good practices that should be taken into account, into consideration when you are solving a 3-hour paper in the exam. We'll also have some discussion around how to approach question 1 and 2, which are the bigger questions, and of course how the scenario changes when you move from section A to section B into the other questions, which are worth 20 marks each. It will also be an important discussion to have with regard to question choice. That is something that is really key. Many candidates have frequently been asking questions about over the last many years that I've been facilitating P7 about what should be the decision process with regard to choosing one of the 2 questions out of the 3 that are available in section B. And we'll have a little discussion around that as well. All right. We shall start with what we have with regard to question 1, and that is obviously something that was key, and you would have obviously attempted this in a 3-hour session. The question was based around a company that provides, it was a listed company, Wisteria company. It provides home emergency cover and domestic repairs to households. So now this kind of industry, if you may want to call it, or this kind of work that is being done by the company is not necessarily something that has occurred previously in paper P7, and also not very common that you get to see this as your audit client. However, a company that offers these kind of services is likely to have its own particular risks, and associated with that are obviously likely to be other risks and financial statement or generally audit risks that are likely to be examined in this question. What was the key with regard to presentation format? They were divided into 4 parts, A, B, C, and D. And there was something that was really important, and that was the different way in which you had to address part A as compared with parts B and C. The reason for this is that you have received an email from the engagement partner, who is Mike Solis. You are supposed to respond to that email, and that email consists of the 4 requirements A, B, C, and D. However, you have to bear in mind that the first part of the email, which was worth 5 marks, part A, basically pertained to a query or queries that had been raised by some of the new recruits. So the response has to be at the level of the new recruits. So the level of information provided, the expression used in part A, will be that as if you are going to tell the partner what he has to say to the new recruits. And the level of knowledge, understanding, exposure of the new recruits is obviously much less as compared to the partner himself. So the parts B, C, and D are something that are going to be used by the partner for his own use so that he can assess the risks, and those included the business risk as well as the audit risk. But for part A, the response has to be tailored around what or how the partner would be explaining this particular thing to the new recruits. Now, we've talked about the basic concepts, and I will not go into a lot of theory. However, we have discussed the fact that business risk is something that the audit risk emanates out of, and this is what the auditor needs to have a look at. So within these elements of business risk, or what obviously is also has 3 components: the operational risk, financial risk, and compliance risk, are associated audit risks. So what could have gone wrong in the financial statements associated with the business issues, the business risks that are faced by the Wisteria company. Now, this was obviously worth 10 marks, which was worth for the business risks, and then there was another part C, which related to the audit risks, and those were also worth 10 marks. So you see that part B says evaluate the business risk facing Wisteria, worth 10 marks, and then part C was identify and explain the audit risk in relation to the audit of the financial statements of Wisteria. Now, again, an important thing to note is what is the key word that has been used in the question. And if you see, the key word that has been used in part B and part B especially is evaluate. So when it says evaluate the business risk, you obviously have to come up with a description, which is a detailed description of why you believe that risk is a risk and why it's significant. So not all risks would classify as significant risks, but what has been asked here is evaluate the business risks. So you put in all of the business risks that you identify associated with Wisteria company. Then on part C, you see that there is the keyword that has been used is identify and explain the audit risk in relation to the audit of financial statements of Wisteria. And again, you have to identify first, for which you perhaps would be able to get half a mark if you just identify that as a risk. But then for the further explanation, you will get another 1 mark, and that would enable you to get the whole 1.5. Well, in some cases up to 2 that would be available for this particular scenario. Part D was then very specific. It had 2 subparts of 3 marks each, and that asked you for recommending the principal audit procedures that should be performed on the condition attached to the grant received by Wisteria. And do bear in mind that this is related to only the condition attached to the grant and not other conditions associated with the grant. So any person who would have taken this as a question with regard to IAS 20 and would have started writing about what are the basic requirements of IAS 20 and that these may not have been met or what we need to verify with regard to IAS 20 compliance may not be able to capture the 3 marks that are available. Also, there was another 3 marks that was available for the land held for sale by Wisteria company. And of course, we had some information about that because they was trying to sell that and it was likely to be, well, sold or not, could be a question. So the principal audit procedures, and this was more broader in that respect, so you would have gotten more than 3 areas that you would have written. However, the marks maximum are limited to 3, so that is what we need to focus on. So this is what we saw over here, and then at the end of the question where you had gone through all the text that was available were also the 4 professional marks. And as you can see, that professional marks will be awarded for the structure and presentation of the briefing notes and for the clarity of explanation. So this is the question where we have the 4 professional marks. It is usually in either question 1 or 2, and well, most of the time we get to see it in question 1, but sometimes you never know, it may come up in question 2 as well. So the 4 professional marks will be available in either of these. We'll talk a bit about professional marks after a bit, but first I believe we need to talk at length about what should have been the way to approach this question first of all. Now the first part of the question, which is something that's related to the new recruits, and you need to explain to them why an understanding of why the auditor needs to obtain an understanding of business risk is worth 5 marks. Now this is the typical kind of question where you may end up having 1 or 2 points to write, but then after having written those 1 or 2 sentences, you are thinking, now what? What do I write now? I don't have much else to write. And there's not a lot of development that you could do on a point in particular. So this can sometimes be tricky, and it may put you in some trouble as regards how to get the whole 5 out of 5 that are available. Although if you take a structured approach to answering this question, you should be able to get the desired number of marks. Now, generally, if I were to ask you, and you were to explain in your own, let's say, not very professional and let's say in a casual style, that why do you want to understand businesses, what would you come up with? The key points, of course, would be that you want to understand the business of the company, and that is why, because the business and the risks associated with the business can actually translate into or emanate into key issues for the auditors. Now, what those key issues could be given, could be explained by giving an example. Now, whether or not you should give an example, that is something that is also a concerning point. Why? Because this appears to be a very general question. Why? Because it says that there are new recruits in the firm, and the partner is going to give a brief risks that would be enabling you to come up with an audit strategy. So this is something that is important to mention over here. Now, also what is important to get the full 5 marks is the fact that you should be using short paragraphs rather than writing bullet points over here. This is not something that is going to help you if you come up with bullet points. Why? Because the whole question has been structured around an email that you have received, and in response to that email, it is your boss, the audit partner, who is expecting you to come up with some points and some valid points. So those should be structured around short paragraphs in particular. We will have, shortly we will have a look at the answer, but before that I would like to have a discussion of all the parts first, before we move on to the answer. Second part of this question, the big one, the two big ones actually, parts B and C, were worth 10 marks each, so 20 marks in total. That means 20% of the paper and a very significant part of the total time that you have been given in this question. In this paper, in fact, will be spent on these two parts. So 20 marks, 10 each means 18 minutes is what you had to do this. Well, you may not have timed yourself according to each of the parts here, but even if you did not, I recommend that it's very simple, because some of the calculations, or multiplying the marks by 1.8 is fairly easy. So the moment you see 10 marks, you multiply that with 1.8 and you get the 18 minutes that are available. And you can actually put a countdown to that. So what I've seen good candidates do is that they time themselves not only on the whole paper or on the whole question, but they even time themselves on the parts of the question. And since these are the bigger parts of the question, so you have like 10 parts meaning 18 minutes, or you could say that, okay, I have two parts, so 10 each, so I have 36 minutes to answer parts B and C combined. And this is also one way that you could have come up with. Now, what does the word evaluate mean when we talk about part B? When we say that there is a business risk, for example, I am in this business and I am with a company and I am selling or emergency cover, providing home emergency cover and domestic repairs to households. So what kind of risks could have happened in my business? Well, if housing is going down, there is a recession in the economy, that would obviously create lesser demand for these products, and I would be faced with losing business. Also, there are certain other situations that were over there related to the buyout and my performance not being very good in the past, but now after having, of course, improved. There has also been allegations with regard to mis-selling, and you would have identified that as well as a business risk, because that arises from the compliance element of business risk, and I hope that many of you would have identified that. However, the key thing is not whether you identified all the business risks. The key thing is whether you actually describe them in sufficient detail. And how do you describe them in sufficient detail? Well, one is the so watch test that I talked about earlier on the second day when we discussed risks in general, and also particularly with regard to very different examples and industries. We talked about the Ferrari versus the others. So it needs to be kept in mind here that the word evaluate, what does that mean? And for this purpose, I wanted to draw your attention to one of the articles that has been written by the examiner, and that has been put into the handout section. So may I request you all to go into the handout section, and over there you should be able to find the exam technique. It's still not there?
They are made.
Okay.
Just a minute.
Okay, so while it goes there, we can have a look at another document. So if you go into the handout section and you open exam tips, so you can see this on the screen as well. There is a Excel file that is named exam tips, right? So this is something that on the second tab, as you can see, and I'm also sharing the screen so you should be able to see this. What are the top 15 mistakes that many people make? So here you can see failure to complete the paper, lack of comprehension of the subject matter, lack of analytical skills. There were a few that were required here. Not a lot of financial information was available. I expect at least that in paper P7, the one attempt that you will be giving for December 16, there will be, of course, some analysis that you will have to do. So numbers perhaps might be higher with regard to the content within the question, so you might get to see more numbers. Lack of lower level assumed knowledge, including that from P2. So there was some P2 knowledge required as well, but not for part B, in fact for part C and D. Lack of awareness of current issues, not relevant over here, but however, failure to respond in a practical, professional, commercial manner. This is something that is really important. So are you giving an answer considering the fact that you are an audit manager and you are writing to your boss, who is the audit partner? An audit partner is, well, probably somebody who has a lot of experience of conducting audits in many different industries. So the language that you are using should be one that should suit a manager's way of writing or describing things to the partner. Lack of relevant practical experience also results in problems sometimes. Answer a question as seen previously. This is a common pitfall, and I really discourage people from doing this. I don't want this to happen, and you should make it a point as well. Do not think about whenever you read a question and you say, hey, this looks like June 2013, and that's where it was. Yeah, I remember what was written there, and you start, reducing or trying to recall what was in there. Do not assume that a question has just reproduced itself from prior years. It has come back to you. It will always be some different industry, some different question. Yes, there can be certain similarities as compared to the prior periods or years. However, that does not necessarily mean that you copy. So do not copy from prior exam papers or answers. That may end up giving you, 20 marks if there is some common ground between the two, 20% of the marks, but that will not result in a pass. So you have to apply your mind. This paper is all about application skills. Inability to make a decision when required. So not here, but in many of the reporting questions that we see, that wherever they are asking for a decision. For example, they want to know, the examiner wants to know what type of report should be issued. They actually want to know which type of report should be issued. It's not something that you just come up and say that, well, I think that qualified opinion could be given. However, considering the facts, if it is too pervasive, maybe we could also think about giving an adverse opinion. This is not something that shows confidence in your ability to make a decision. And at the B7, since this is advanced audit insurance, you are actually expected to make the decisions, to make the key significant decisions as part of the audit process. So you should bear that in mind, that this is important, that whenever a decision is asked for, you should give that decision. Poor presentation, we have talked a lot about this as well. One thing that I say is that this is not the time to save trees. So if you are using one or two extra papers, that is fine, because this is your paper, it's your professional career that is at stake right now, and it's your paper P7 that you need to pass, which is the last stair, in your professional studies. So it's the last step. So you basically have to give a very professional, a very thorough, clear, and well-presented answer. So do not think about saving space on anything. You can write each and every point in a separate short paragraph, leave adequate space after each paragraph, right? Could be 1 or 2 or 3 lines, depending on how much cluttered your other words are. Do not give answers that are too vague. 11 number is something that you see too often, and we discussed that as well. We discussed this yesterday as well when we talked about prospective financial information and about the forensic accounting engagements. That is particularly where you should not be giving vague answers. So you have to be very specific. Same applies to question 1 over here as well. So for example, if you are coming up with a response that says, that is like, we believe that the mis-selling is compliance risk associated with the business, or there is a risk that and explain the audit risk associated with Wisteria company. So you just start off writing about it. You don't have to put in the right the descriptions associated with that particular case. No added value, something that has come up in the question, you start reducing that. So this is a very common problem as well. Wherever you are unable to make a decision and write things, what you do is that you say a number of buyout groups have approached the board of Wisteria with an offer. This is a risk, or there is a risk that this will not be done. So you copy from the question text and you put that in your answer, and you believe that you've come up with the risk. Had B7 been that simple, well, I think the pass rate would have been 80 or 90%, but it is not. So actually what is required here is not reproduction from the question scenario, rather try to come up with your own way of explaining the risk. If the risk is there, well, they would not have asked you about the risk, they would have asked you about something else. So the risk is not there, but the risk trigger is there. There is an indication, there is a trigger event that is causing that risk to come. So that is something that is important, and you need to have a look at that. Should not contradict the question, and so failure to conclude, and also the so what test that we talked about. Now moving back to the handouts that I was talking about. So if you go to the handouts, you should be able to find a document that is titled 24, number 24, how to tackle audit and assurance case studies questions. So this is basically part one of a two-part series of articles that is being written by the examiner. So this is coming from the examiner. This is not coming from any other person or any other who claims to be an expert in auditing or somebody, and it's not my prerogative either. So it's basically coming directly from the person who's going to check your papers perhaps. So number 24 and number 25 are the two documents that you can see. Part 1 is how to tackle audit and assurance case studies question, and then you have number 25, which is the part 2 of the same article. So let's open number 24, as you can see. And right here, if you go to the bottom of the first page, that is where I want to draw your attention towards. That is the first thing that is really, really important with regard to the question number 1 that we are just having a look at. Now, this is talking about the requirements compared with what you are actually supposed to write. So what does it mean when the examiner says identify, or comment on, or explain, or evaluate and assess, critically discuss, or justify? Now, this is important to look at. If it says identify, which it said in part C, but only partially, because it said identify and explain. So if it says identify in part C, so you pick out a relevant issue or point from the scenario. That's what you have to do. And you get half a mark for that. So you identify the audit risk. You pick out that there is a land that is going to be sold, or you pick out the fact that there is a takeover or a hostile takeover that could happen. But then that was combined with what you see as number 3 here, which is explain. Clarify and provide extra details on a subject matter. So now you mix the two. What is it required in part C? Pick out a relevant issue or point from the scenario and clarify and provide extra details on a subject matter. When you do that, that's when you will be able to get the 1.5 or the 2 marks for each audit risk identified. Also worthwhile here is to discuss what is the meaning of the word evaluate. Evaluate, which is required in part B over here. So evaluate means weigh up the advantages and disadvantages and make a judgment. Right? Now, when it says evaluate a business, of course, a risk is not going to end up giving you any advantages. However, you weigh up a judgment, you make a judgment. So you weigh up how significant that risk is, what could that risk cause, what could potentially be the loss to the business arising either at the operational level or at the financial level or at the compliance level with regard to that particular risk. Sometimes they also say comment on, which is number 2 here, and it says offer an opinion or debate a topic or express a reaction. Well, really, but it has been seen that it says justify, which is the last one here, and says come to a conclusion and provide a strong argument for a decision. So this is something that is important to understand, that what does the examiner mean when they highlight about these things. Now let's also have a little discussion on professional marks. With regard to professional marks, it has to be emphasized that many candidates believe that simply writing from, to, from, date, subject, title, and at the end regards, thank you, bye-bye, will result in giving you the 4 marks. Well, unfortunately, that may be true, but only very partially. the actual thing that the 4 professional marks are awarded for are not for just simple from, do, and dates. They're not just for a format. They're for a whole lot of other things. So let's have a look at what you see here on the professional marks, right on the screen in front of you. It says the ACCA qualification features a core theme of ethics and professionalism, and all professional level exams will contain some marks. In paper P7, the professional marks will be allocated between the 2 Section A questions with the maximum. When this was written, then that's how it used to occur. Now you have the 4 full professional marks in either question 1 or question 2. The requirement will clearly state how many marks are available and which question requirement they relate to. It is likely that Section A requirement containing professional marks will ask for the answer in a particular format, such as a report or briefing notes. The professional marks will be awarded for the following. It says structure and presentation. So the key thing is whether you wrote a structured answer. Now my question to you is, where does the structure come from? Think about constructing a building. If you want to construct a building, do you just start off by taking all the bricks and the cement and everything and start building? No. The first thing you do is plan. So, if you talk about structure will come when you will plan. So you need to plan the structure of your answer. You have to plan about what are you going to write. You need to think about what will be my key business risks, what will be my key audit risks, which of the business risks will actually emanate into, result into, or create an audit risk. And that is how you will be structuring your answer. Because if you do not do this, the same theory applies. Failing to plan is planning to fail. Then, clarity of explanation, the second item for which you get the professional marks. If you are not clear in the way you're expressing, number one, it indicates to the reader, perhaps you do not have a command over the subject, and maybe you are confused about it, which is why you are not expressing a point in clarity. Or maybe you are in a hurry and you do not have enough time to write it in sufficient detail. Third, use of language appropriate to the adversary. This is something we talked about right when we started today. That part A related to you telling the partner how to explain business risks to a new recruit, to somebody who had just joined, who had, 6 months or 1 year or even less of experience of auditing. But part B and C and D related to risk, whether business or audit and procedures associated with the Wisteria company that we had to explain to the partner. And the partner was somebody with probably 20, 25, 30 or even more years of experience of assurance. Use of professional judgment, really important. Discussion of both sides of a debate. This is especially true when it asks for the impact on the opinion, right? And appreciation of relevant current professional issues. These are the areas or things around which the 4 professional marks are built. So it's really important to understand and do not just think about the fact that, maybe all I do is write about from, to, subject, date, regards, conclusion, and that is going to get me the 4 marks. That is not going to happen. So, doing that may get you 1 maybe out of the 4, but not the whole 4 marks that are available, right? Now, also important to note is what has been highlighted over here with regard to identification and explanation of the issue. So sometimes, as I said, some of the verb requirements have been mixed. So identify and explain, or comment and evaluate, or discuss. We'll come back to this document as we move along. But I think it's important to have an assessment of what did we think about should have been the way to approach this question and how better could we actually approach this question. Also, there's a list of items that I want you to have a look at on the exam tips paper. So if you go back to the Excel file now, so there is a tab underneath that is tips and techniques. Now what I've done here is this, basically I've put in about 20, yes, there are 20 of them, about 20 items that are going to act like your checklist. So these should be like your checklist of especially question 1 and 2. Every time you have gone through the exam practice of question 1 and question 2, any paper, you should try to fill out this checklist and figure out where are the areas where you're getting many times you're getting the crosses. You're not being able to tick that. So you ask yourself the question. So you read what is written on the top of the Excel file. Did I read the question requirement first? Did I read the question scenario thoroughly? Now that is also very important. I've seen many candidates actually try to read the question and understand it. And they don't in the first go. So they reread it. And then they reread it. And they keep reading it like 4 times, 5 times, trying to figure out what is this about, or maybe trying to get something out of it that they have not yet grasped. This is a habit that is going to come with experience. And this is really important. So I highly recommend that what you should try to achieve is that you should try to read and understand at the same time. So read and understand in one go. Now, many people over here, English is not their mother tongue. English is not a language that comes naturally. And this is something, for a few, it is actually out of the comfort zone as well. But this should not act as a barrier. And this is absolutely not a barrier. And I'm a personal witness to it because I've seen this happen with me, with many people around me. You should not think of this as a barrier. This is not something that is going to put you into trouble. All you need to do is put in just a little more effort to try and understand and to read and understand in one go. If you have the question in front of you and you like reading it whole and you read the whole 2 pages and at the end you say, what? And you go back again. So that basically implies that you were reading but your mind wasn't really there. And then you read it for the 2nd time and the 3rd time to do this. Now what is an effective technique to do to be able to do this? One is to acclimatize yourself. You should be able to acclimatize yourself with the English language. Also, important is to be more and more inclined toward business language. And this is why I highly recommend to go through the various, you know all the top of the line journalist websites that are available. You have all the media and the channels. So look at some of the business news or the business newspapers that you have. I recommend that you go through some of the business newspapers that are published on a daily basis. There are many of them that are available online, so you don't actually have to, go out in the market to purchase them. But acclimatize yourself with business language. Acclimatize yourself with English language that has been used formally and professionally for English, for professionals, right? Because if you do that, you will stop writing things like, ask the client whether a fraud happened. You will actually frame it and structure it in a way that will look much, much more professional, right? So that is something that is very important. This is like something coming out of your comfort zone. This will create, well, some kind of a problem for you in the beginning. But the quicker you do it, and the earlier you do it, it is better for you. So acclimatize yourself with this, and take this as a challenge that you have to be totally compliant with. So read the question scenario thoroughly. Now going back to the Excel file, did I underline while I read? So it helps in identifying significant matters in this. It's a very important one. Why? Because sometimes what happens is all I'm doing is that I'm reading a whole paragraph that has been given to me, and I just underline a particular point. For example, the mis-selling in Westeria company's case. So I underline this and I take it out, and that becomes a trigger point for one of the risks that I want to write. Now, I don't have to read the whole paragraph again the next time in order to identify that risk. Why? Because that underline, that highlight, or that small word that I may have written is actually keeping the signals on. It's prompting me that there is something that needs to be written in my answer. It will keep on prompting me, and I will think about it, that yes, I need to write about it. And then I'll be able to develop a paragraph around it without actually having to read the question scenario once again. So the key problem that I see, because I've witnessed many people, whenever I give them the question papers and I see them in front of me, and irrespective of nationality or what kind of English comfort level they have with the English language, they actually are very eager to grasp whatever is written on the first page. And there is this tendency to get as much out as possible, which is very natural, which is very humane, and you should be doing it partially. However, you also have to avoid the tendency to skip on certain items in your hurriedness. So there is a possibility that in your haste you may actually skip a certain very important item. So I always recommend to have a pencil, and this is not a pencil, this is a marker, however, to have that in your hand and to actually highlight, or a ballpoint, whatever you have in the paper, to highlight at least the trigger points, the trigger factors that cause the risk. So when you're reading Wisteria Company, and let's read from the notes from the meeting that are available, and you should be able to see this. So what I do is, a number of buyout groups have approached the board of Wisteria with an offer to purchase the entire share capital. Chief executive of Wisteria, Carlos, owns 15. The offers have been rejected as they were not. Now, what do we want to underline here? Offer to purchase and rejected, and 15%. Those are the key things that are basically triggering certain things that you want to write in the answer. So it's always going to remain there, and you will not have to actually. And it also helps in one other way. Once you're done with the question, you've completed question 1, and you're going to move to question 2, and you have a few minutes left. Or the whole time of the paper has almost lapsed. You're left with 5 minutes, and you answered everything, and you want to make sure that everything is fine. You've covered everything. What do? You go back to the question and look at the marked up version of your question, and then oops, there's this thing that I had highlighted but I did not mention. Let's write about it. And you quickly get the 2 or the 3 marks that are available for writing a point on that particular thing. So I think that is very important that you underline while you read. Number 4, prepare an answer plan. We've talked at length about this. But what should the answer plan be like? The answer plan is not going to be your answer. The answer plan does not have to be detailed. The answer plan is only a trigger point, right? So what you write in the answer plan is perhaps 1 word, 2 words per bullet. That's all. And you explain and develop on that based on that answer plan. So it should only include words or small phrases as your trigger points. Also, you ask yourself the question, did you use paragraphs and headings? Well, headings, whether they should or should not be used is something that is debatable. In the ACCA answer and in this answer that you are looking at, that you may have in front of you, headings have been used. However, it is, in the haste of, things that they are as they stand in the exam hall situation, I can understand. So I'm not going to emphasize a lot on putting the headings in there. However, on paragraphs, I think there should be almost like zero compromise. Every point must come in a new paragraph. In fact, within the same point, you can develop that using 2 or 3 paragraphs. And you will see that in the answer over here, that the answer, the suggested solution that you have is actually something that relates to, in which 1 point has been explained using 2 or 3 short paragraphs. Always provide a professional answer. Avoid casual and informal words such as ask, what they do, and check the invoice, and all those kind of words and phrases. Do not use that. There are always other words that are available, and I'll just say a few of them. Review, inspect, scrutinize, evaluate, right? All of these words are better than just saying check the invoice. Avoid reproducing from the scenario. I have talked about it, but I just want to tell you that also, in addition to that, that when you reproduce from the scenario, what does it demonstrate? When you reproduce from the scenario, it demonstrates a confused candidate. Somebody who lacks knowledge or confidence, or both. So you do not give that demonstration, you do not give that indication to the examiner that you don't know what to write, or you cannot develop on a point that you just mentioned. You actually give something that is related to the question scenario, however, it comes in your own words, and not the words that have been used in the question. Demonstrate insight by inferring from the question scenario. That's the key thing. So those are two things are related. Infer from the scenario, refer to the scenario, do not reproduce from the scenario. Did you demonstrate business acumen and application skills? Do not talk about general definitions of audit risks and business risks and all that, which may not be very relevant over here, especially for part C and D. Did you always consider the industry to which the client belongs? And this one was a difficult industry actually. Let's see what industry is tested in your case. The number 12 on the screen in front of you is, did you consider my position, role in the question? Sometimes, and usually that is the case, in paper P7, you are made the audit manager. So you have to give your response as an audit manager. Now, audit manager is somebody with at least, I'd say, 3 years of audit exposure. And it can range from 3 to up to 10 years of audit exposure, or even more maybe. So you have to realize that you are writing your answer as if you are an audit manager, somebody who has served a lot of time in the assurance profession. So do not write language that shows that as if it is coming from a student or from a first year person in the audit department of your firm. However, there can be situations where in certain questions, not question 1, but other questions in section B, for example, you are given the role of the engagement quality reviewer. Now, in that case, the engagement quality reviewer is also somebody who's at a very senior level, in fact, much more than a manager. So it's something like a partner level person or a director or an executive director level person. So the language that should be used as part of that should be coming in from, as look like something that's coming in from an independent partner level person. There will be a few times where you may be made the partner as well, and where you are supposed to come up with a decision. Step number 13 is very important, especially for the big questions. Number 13 is a technique that has helped me personally as well passing my papers, but it's something that I actually listened to many times from the candidates. Number 13 pertains to midway through your answer. Stopping. Put your pen down. Read the question requirement again. Make sure you are on track. Make sure you are not detracting from the answer. So it is very important to understand that you should not detract from your answer. Sometimes there can be a tendency, and I'll show this how this can happen in Wisteria company. Now look what it asks in part B of Wisteria company. Part B says evaluate the business risk facing Wisteria. Now since you were in a hurry and you wanted to read this quickly and grasp what it is about, you forgot that part C was actually about audit risks. So what did you do? In part B of the answer, you started writing audit risks without actually reading the question requirement in part C. Now what will happen? You complete your part B, you think you've done an excellent job, great job, what an answer, I should be able to get 10 out of 10, and then you move to part C. You read part C and you find out, wasn't this what I have already written in part B? And that is the common pitfall to avoid. So, read the question requirements carefully, and midway during your answer, always put the pen down and stop. This will not take more than 10 seconds. I assure you. It will take 10 seconds. But it will make sure that you are answering what has been asked. It will make sure that you are giving a relevant answer. Not something that is going to result in the next one whole page that you've written being crossed out and giving nil marks. Always consider the stage of the audit, that is whether it is the planning stage, the execution stage or the finalization stage of the audit. Wherever an opinion is asked for, always provide an opinion. It is an important one. Always prioritize your points. For example, management representations as an audit evidence is something that is, well, not something that is to be given 100% top priority. It is something that is lesser in terms of quality with regard to quality as an audit evidence, right? So it should come on the bottom, maybe somewhere in the end, and the key pieces of evidence should come up on top. Similarly, over here in Wisteria company's example, some of the audit risks were much more important. And let's look at the answer to find some of them. So if you look at the suggested answer, and for this I would recommend that you go to the paper that you have in front of you, the answer. So you look at part C, and in part C, the audit risks, first of all, is the new audit client. Now we will have to see how many of you actually picked up on this risk. But this is a key risk and a very important one. Why? Because had this been the recurring audit client, you would have known a lot of information about this already. You would have done this based on your previous experience as well. And it would have probably taken much lesser time. Because since it's a new industry, it's an industry that is unique, yes, and also it's a client that is the first time coming up to you. So this is an important, in fact, one of the most important audit risks that need to be pointed out. Then the mis-selling part was much, much more important. But if you move to the later parts of the answer for part C, so for example, the last one is land held for sale. I'm not saying that it's an important, it's a lesser, it's not an important risk. It is an important risk, but not as important as some of the risks that you see on top. So always prioritize the risks that you have and focus on the key risks. However, do note that prioritizing does not mean that the first risk is written in 10 lines and the last risk is written in half a line, because they carry equal weightage. In terms of the marking scheme, the risks carry equal weight. But to get the professional marks actually, which are 4, you actually prioritize your points so that you tell them that this is a professional, well-structured, well-rounded answer. Did you leave 1 to 3 minutes at the end of each question for review? Again, something that you should ask yourself. Many of you may not have been able to do it. I don't want you to get really tensed about it and really worried that if this is not happening, maybe something bad is going to happen. No. However, leaving 1 minute or 2 minutes at the end basically gives you enough time, well, to take a breather and to breathe a sigh of relief for a little while. And also, it actually enables you to make sure that you've actually written what was required from the question requirement, and if there's any point that is missing, it has been captured accordingly and appropriately. Describe each point in sufficient detail and clarity. Also important to refer to ISA, ISRE, ISA or ISRS, whichever standard we're talking about. It is a good practice to refer to that standard. We've talked at length about the fact that whether or not you should give the full names and numbers of the standard. It is not something that is mandatory. However, if you do it, it does create a good impression on the examiner. And I believe that it creates a good, well-professional, well-rounded and good professionally presented answer. Also, for wherever procedures have been asked, the last one you see is did you refer to the audit assertions which are being addressed. So wherever the question is around procedures or the key risks, it's important that the risk is identified associated with the assertions that are given. Let's check if we have any questions.
There's one comment from Fakhruddin, and he's saying, can you please explain point number 15 from the spreadsheet, the exam tips?
disclaimer or qualified or clean or emphasis of matter. That's it. There are no other options. You can't say that I could think about it first, but maybe I could also do that. You have to place yourself in the shoes of the audit partner making that decision. It is a difficult thing to do for somebody who's a student and somebody, even more so for someone who does not have practical auditing exposure. But the situations that come up in paper P7 are not that tricky that put you into a lot of trouble. So wherever an opinion has been asked that what is the opinion that should be given, you should actually give that opinion in your answer. Other questions?
Not really.
All right. So let's move back to now part D also. Now part D basically related to recommending the principal audit procedures that should be performed on condition associated with the grant and the land held for sale. Now if you look at the solution to this, which is also available in the handout section, so you can see that the marking scheme is structured to give you 3 marks in total. And you have to come up with 1 mark for one procedure for which you will get 1 mark. So it's important to see that how many procedures can you come up with, right? In case of D1, you could have actually come up with many procedures. But what was so important to note was that you only had to come up with procedures that were relevant. And the relevant procedures are the ones that related to the condition attached to the grant and nothing else. So this is important to see that did you actually give the procedures that were associated with the condition attached to the grant. So the responses that you see here also on the screen in front of you relate to obtaining the grant document and reviewing the terms to verify 100,000 installation targets, deadline for installation and criteria for eligible customers. Also review the terms to establish the financial repercussions of breaching the condition. Right? Obtain documentation for management showing the application criteria that has been used for installation. Inquire how eligible customers are identified and the plan in place to ensure 100,000 installations are achieved. Again, everything is associated with condition attached to the grant, not associated with the other aspects of IS 20 or recognition of assets or income and expenses and so on. Right? So this is important to understand that what are the things that are actually required. So now the suggested answer has basically come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points, as you can see. But in an actual exam situation, if you come up with any 3 of these, you actually get 3 marks that are available. So this could potentially have been worth 5 marks in this question. And well, if you were to ask me about what is good or bad about it, I may want to have to take out part A from this and to get more marks in for part D1 and D2 here. And that is something that perhaps may put some of the candidates in a bit of a problem. However, it is something that is actually practical. It's related to practical knowledge of accounting and auditing. So there is a lot that you could have written for D1, but only if you focused only on what was the key requirement of the question, which is condition associated with the grant. D2 was audit procedures on the land held for sale. Now this is something on which you could have written a lot as well. But here, I think this is easier as compared to D1. Why? Because it is related to the standard about which, well, if you have a lot of knowledge on IFRS 5 and the held for sale criteria and everything, you are able to write a lot of things around it. But a key common pitfall here could be the tendency to write a lot on IFRS 5. You have to always keep in mind that this is paper P7 and it is related to advanced audit and assurance. This is not a ground where you have to show or demonstrate your P2 skills. Many of you may already have passed P2. So this is not the time to tell the examiner that I know very good knowledge, I have a very good knowledge about P2. You've already done that and it is appreciated. However, only a reference to the accounting or financial reporting standards shall be required in the exam. Do not start reproducing the basic requirements of standards, especially accounting standards. Do not start writing at length about them. All you need to do for part D2 was actually just come up with very short line, one-liners perhaps, short sentences associated with the procedures. And that could include inspecting the board minutes, inquiring of management whether the land is currently in use, obtaining written confirmation from mysterious solicitors, inspecting evidence of active marketing of land, recalibrating the fair value of the land less cost to sell, inspecting purchase agreements for sale of land completed to date, and inspecting the financial statements to ensure that the land is disclosed appropriately and separately on the face of the statement of financial position. So presentation and disclosure is also key. Now, if you look at the marking scheme, that's how it is structured, and you can look at it. I won't be reading this out, as you can see it on the screen. So this is an important one, and you should pay heed to how you can get the marks that are available, right? Now, a key thing that I wanted to highlight, and that is why I am writing this down here, is that many of us love these assertions: existence, completeness, rights and obligation, and valuation. We love them because we like to talk a lot about them in the paper P7. So we like to talk a lot about valuation of inventory, valuation of receivables, whether the receivables exist, whether the revenue has been completely recorded, whether we have the right associated with the asset that has been leased. So it is very common. But there is one assertion that is missed out many times. And it is a very important one, and it is like a free mark almost that is available, but we miss out. And that is the presentation and disclosure assertion. The presentation and disclosure assertion. So it is important to come up with procedures associated with presentation and disclosure as well. Think about this assertion and the procedures that you can write. Always in an actual exam setting, in an actual exam situation, do not only focus on these assertions, but also on the presentation and disclosure assertions. Right? Okay, we shall now move to question number 3. We talked about the fact that the P7 paper is now not focused on asking just one part of a syllabus in one whole big question. Rather, what you are usually seeing now is that many different topics have been asked in a single question. And this is what you saw here on question 2 as well. That there was one part totally dedicated to, well, a pharmaceutical research company that had certain KPIs associated with, well, some performance indicators, performance information. And then there was another part which was totally different, not related to part A, was 9 marks, which was associated with the fact that there were some damages that were being claimed from a site or where housing development was actually taking place. So there were 2 separate parts to this question. Now part A basically had been divided into further 3 parts, 4, 4 and 8 marks each. First, ask why it may not be possible to provide a high level of assurance over stated KPI, discussing or describing the procedures to verify the number of serious accidents in 2016, and then lastly recommending 8 additional KPIs which could be used to monitor site and company's social and environmental performance. So it's talking about additional KPIs. We've talked at length about social and public information and performance information auditing. But now this example that you see here was deliberately not given by me in the session when we did it on day 4 associated with this performance information auditing. Because I wanted you to try your mind out to think about it, about what would happen in this particular scenario. So this was a pharmaceutical company. It was donating actually free of charge healthcare to healthcare charities, 1% of revenue, right? So the draft KPI was 0.8% and the actual KPI for 2015 was 1.2%, right? Donations to and cost of involvement with local community charities was again 0.5%. For draft KPI 2016 it was 0.6%, and last year was not a general question. This was particularly related to the scenario at hand, which is the SciTech company, the pharmaceutical company. So you had to come up with answer that had to be relevant to the SciTech company and related to the stated 3 KPIs that you see on the table. Right? The second part was 4 marks was describing the procedures to verify the number of serious accidents. Now this again focused only on one of the KPIs. So how would you, what type of procedures would you perform on this? Now you may be thinking that since the word describe has been used, maybe we just come up with 2 procedures and we will be able to get the 4 available. However, you can see this in the marking scheme here and I'm going to highlight it. It says 1 mark per procedure. The tutorial note is procedures should focus on completeness of the disclosure as it is in the interest of SciTech company to understate the number of serious accidents. Now, why is it there? Because you have to bear in mind that this kind of KPI, number of accidents, is something that is important in terms of telling the company, telling the public at large that what kind of a workplace are they giving to their employees. Now, in this particular case, it should be mentioned here, and it's important to note here that the target is less than 5. Okay, so actual KPI is 2, and they are saying 4. There has been an increase. Now, how would you do this? You will want to do this through a lot of different ways, but you have to come up with procedures that are specific. So what you could write in the answer is also what you see on the screen. So what is a serious accident? Maybe they have fudged up the figures by actually refraining from making an accident a serious accident. Review the accident log book and count the total number of accidents during the year. That could happen. But also there is a chance that the accident log book did not actually contain one or some of the accidents that took place. So this is also important. For serious accidents identified, review the HR record to determine the amount of time taken off, review the payroll record to determine the financial amount of sick pay awarded to employee, and review correspondence with the employee regarding the accident. Again, this is something that is important. Board minutes could have been reviewed, you could have talked about it, but if you simply wrote review board minutes, would you get the marks? No. You will have to describe what you need to see in the board minutes. So what do you need to see? You review board minutes where the increase in the number of serious accidents has been discussed. There should have been some discussion around the serious accidents within the board minutes. Simply writing review board minutes will not get you there. Correspondence with SciTech legal counsels could be reviewed to ascertain legal claims made against the company due to accidents at work, discuss the level of accidents with representatives of SciTech employees, and inquire as to whether any health and safety visits have been conducted during the year by regulatory bodies, and review any documentation or correspondence issued to SciTech after such visits. Again, an important one here is related to the fact that you only have to come up with 4 out of all these that are mentioned. So the suggested answer is usually something that is, well, lengthier, much longer, gives a lot of detail. It has not been solved, obviously, in the 3 hours that you had. It has been solved in more than 3 hours and then reviewed many times, of course. However, you want to try to go as close as possible to this, and you want to come up with the 3 best that you. So also think about how many did I come up with. If this was not worth 4 marks, had this been worth 7 marks, would I be able to come up with 7 procedures? Ask this question to yourself. Why? Because in an actual B7 paper, you are sometimes left with a situation where you have just 2 or 3 points to write. You write them down, and then you are sitting and saying, now what? What do I do now? Because the question is worth 12 marks, and all you've written is 3 or 4 points. So this can actually happen to you in an exam. So I think this is good practice to do, that you think about more procedures than what has been asked here. Because this is practice time. So you're practicing. So you should be able to do this. You're sitting at home or somewhere and not in the actual exam hall, tense environment that it is usually like. Right? So this is something that you could think about. Now, the major section in the part A relates to 8 marks, which was recommending 8 additional KPIs, which could be used to monitor SciTech social and environmental performance, and outline the nature of evidence it should be made available should be available to provide assurance on accuracy of the KPIs mentioned. A very broad question in terms of what has been asked, or the type of question that it is, and what would you have responded. However, if you take a structured response to this, if you make a structured response to this, what would you do? You would recommend each of the 8 KPIs first, think about them, and then for each of them, you would want to be able to provide the evidence, the nature of evidence that you would want to see in association with that. Now, this is something that could potentially be more than worth 8 marks, because the kind of information that has been requested as an answer it requires a lot of thinking. Yes, you need to think about it. Even the best of the best candidates will have to spend some time thinking about, okay, how would I come? And then there are 8 that have been asked. So there's a long list that you see on the screen in front of you. Let's see how many of you actually came up with, let's say, 5 at least out of these, because 8 were required. So if you can come up with more than 5 out of what you see on the screen, then I think you've done a decent job. But you also need to consider what other factors could be there in a pharmaceutical company. Now again, as I said in your paper P7, it could be any company, any industry that could be examined, and not necessarily just the pharmaceutical industry. But yes, social and environmental issues are sometimes more important and more significant in industries such as pharmaceutical, in oil and gas, for example, in the mining industry, for example, where workers are put through a very hazardous environment, in the chemicals industry, for example, where hazardous chemicals are being processed or used. So all of these kind of industries and cases can actually pop up in the paper P7 that you will be giving in December 16. Now the social indicators that you see, percentage female employees, percentage ethnic minority employees, staff absentee rate, number of days of absenteeism, employee satisfaction, monetary value of staff training and development, staff turnover, level of complaints, and time taken to pay suppliers. These are some of the social issues. Then you also come up with environmental issues. Why? Because it says recommend 8 additional KPIs which could be used to monitor sci-tech companies' social and environmental performance. Again, a problem with the candidate who did not read the question properly would have probably only focused on social issues. This question asked for 8 KPIs associated with social and environmental, both kinds of issues. So you should have thought about environmental issues as well. And these are percentage change in water use, electricity use compared to the prior. For example, how many units of electricity did you use? How many liters of water did you use, for example, right? Monetary amount of investment in or purchase of environmentally friendly items, for example, light-saving bulbs, energy-efficient bulbs, recycling of paper, etc. Quantification of carbon footprint, percentage waste recycled compared to non-recycled, and all of these things you could mention. Now, associated with each of the issues that you identified, you should be able to come up with the nature of evidence that needs to be described, right? And for each of them, it would be different. So to identify how many employees are female, you would actually have to go through the personal files to find out how many of them are actually females, right? For staff absentee rates, you want to check the attendance record, the payroll record, especially whenever somebody has taken in a sick leave. So they would have come up also with a medical certificate or a medical practitioner's statement that this person is not well and I prescribe rest or day off from work, something like that. So all of that could be done basically when you come up with the right kind of procedure. So it's basically actually first thinking about the KPI and then coming up with an idea around what or how would I be verifying this KPI. Now the nature of evidence does not have to be fairly detailed. You do not have to come up with a long list of things. And do note here that the word that has been used in the question requirement is outline the nature of evidence, right? So evidence has been asked, procedure has not been asked. So do not think about this question as a question on procedures. There have been cases where, it's been, an example has been like a Disneyland or amusement park or something. I've seen beverage examples, I've seen examples about pharmaceuticals, we've seen some from the mining industry, from the telecom and the banking sector as well, but not a lot, of course, because that's too complex at times. So insurance and banking and telecoms are slightly more complex. Yes, oil and gas as well sometimes. So all kinds of industry can be actually examined. Now this one is the hospitality industry, so it comes from a national hotel group. And there are 9 marks available associated with the additional information which you should have come up with associated with the scenario that was given. Now, there is a background information that is spread over 3 paragraphs, and then you have been given a brief, basically. So the brief is around 3-4 paragraphs long as well, which is the CEO, managing director, family director, are family members, and major shareholders. It has a good reputation. Due to recession in the building, company has operated at overdraft limit for the last 18 months, so it is, well, financially appears to be not at the best or ideal condition. The accounting policies are generally less prudent, so they are slightly, aggressive in regard to the accounting policies. And they have recently received a claim that a site on which it built a housing development several years ago was not properly drained. Now, a very simple question around this would have been structured to say, what procedure should be carried out in relation to these 4 things that you see in the brief? But the question is very different. The question is, state with reasons the additional information which should be made available for your review of Robson construction. How should you approach this question? You should think about each of the 4 scenarios, the 4 paragraphs that are there, and think about the kind of procedures you want to do to verify this particular item. And then, associated with the procedure, think about what is the evidence that you would need. And that will basically enable you to answer this question. If you haphazardly read the question and just think about, okay, what would I need about this? It will not get you a lot of items in your mind. And you may not be able to capture the entire 9 marks that are available. Please note that this is worth 9 marks. After having performed 3 parts of part A, you have still only been able to get or capture, 8 and 8, 16 marks. There are still 9 marks that are available, and these are compulsory marks. So I think that it is an important one to consider that, and this can happen actually in the exam situation, because many candidates I talk to have created this mental barrier of time between section A and section B. And since this is being solved in the last few moments of section A time that you have, and at this point in time, the key concern at the back of your mind is that I need to make a selection for question 3, 4, and 5. I need to read them, I need to find out, time is short, there's 40% of the paper that's left after having done this. So there is a key common pitfall that you could not actually read the question carefully and forget about what has actually been asked. Do note that this is worth 9 marks, and these 9 marks are the compulsory ones. Having left it would put you in a very difficult situation, and you may not be able to pass. And also, not solving this properly may actually, reduce or diminish your chances of passing. So, give it the full time. And this basically would come when you would have spent the right amount of time, the optimal level of time on question 1. Usually what I see and what I know from, having discussion, post-exam discussion with many candidates is people who suffer hard during question 1, people who find that difficult and overflow that time of question 1. Every minute that they have taken extra on question 1 is basically putting a pressure on them with regard to section B. And you all know about the concept of opportunity cost. Many of you have actually studied economics in your earlier studies, and even those who do not, should fairly have the concept of opportunity cost. So what is the concept of opportunity cost? It's very simple. Everything that you're doing, every resource that you're spending, there's another alternative that is available that you're foregoing. So if I'm spending $10 to buy a ball, I could spend the $10 to download an app, right? And there is a different level of utility or satisfaction that I could derive by playing with a ball as compared to buying an app on my mobile. So similarly, the concept of opportunity cost is that for every minute that I am spending, 1 minute, and now consider this, 10 minutes, 10 minutes extra on question 1. What is the cost? The cost is 10 less minutes. 10 less minutes on either section A, question 2, or section B. So either question 2 or section B. Plus an additional force that is created in me with regard to the tension that is building up in me. I'm in a hurry, I'm looking at the clock, I can't, I'm tense, and time is passing by, I'm sweating now profusely, and it's getting really difficult. And I'm looking at other people, some of them are really calm and composed in the hall, and some of them are really tense just like I am. And that all creates additional tension. And this all is actually negative tension. It's very, very difficult to convert this negative tension into positive, because very few people can actually do that. So every 10 extra minutes that you're spending on the first question or the first 2 questions, whether it's question 1 or 2, is actually meaning that there is 10 less minutes that you have on the question 2. Plus, there is tension. And these combined, these 2 forces, are something that you don't want to deal with, because they are really putting you in a difficult time spot. So try to avoid this tendency, right? And think about these key areas. Right, now I will give you some time to read an article on exam technique. So what I want you guys to do is to go to the handout section, and in the handout section you should be able to find a document that is titled 25 Audit and Assurance Case Study Questions. So the name of the document is 25 Audit and Assurance Case Study Questions. This is actually part 2 of this. It is 6 pages long, right? Fairly detailed, but it comes up with a lot of actual, instances of prior questions. So I really encourage you to read this in entirety, to go through the whole document and to look at what are the good exam techniques. Do note that this is coming directly from the examiner. So I think this is advice that we should heed. And it talks about, for example, as you can see on the screen since I'm sharing it, stage 1, understanding the requirement. Stage 2, reading the scenario, and then it moves on to actual scenarios, and then stage 3, you take time to think about the requirement of the scenario, right? And then stage 4, actually writing the report. And what should you write in the report, and how should that be structured, right? So I think let's spend about 15 minutes to read this, after which we will move on to a discussion about section B. While you're doing this, I also want you, each one of you, to actually write down in the question text box that you have, what was your choice of questions between question 3, question 4, and question 5. Which one did you do? So also write this in the question text box. It will just take 10-15 seconds hardly. So write that down so I have a fair idea about how much of the population actually selected which questions. Right? So I want to have an idea around that so we can structure the remaining part of the day on that. And also 15 minutes to read the article that is there. Right, see you in 15. All right. So I hope you find that article interesting, and since it's coming directly from the examiner, it is important to know a lot of things that the examiner has mentioned about exam technique. I also recommend that the first part of this article, which we just saw for a short while, and we just had a glance through it, I encourage you guys to go through that article as well, thoroughly, to read part 1 and part 2, both articles. And that will give you a holistic picture of how to approach Section A questions. So section A is now done with, and now we're moving on to section B. Shorter questions, and usually ones that require less percentage time of thinking and planning, because most of them are direct in nature. Scenario is not very long, so you do not have to spend a lot of time in reading, which is usually the case in section A. Also, what is different in section B is the fact that since you have these shorter scenarios, so the answers, the responses are also usually shorter. Now, I have posed this question to you and asked you guys to put in the question text box which of the questions did you actually do out of the 3 that were available. And what I can see from the responses that I have received is that many of you chose question 3 and question 4. So those were the 2 that were chosen. Although question 5, it pertains to reporting, since it was divided into many different parts, many of you may not have felt comfortable without around reporting areas, and especially the going concern aspect that was tested. Now, a little discussion on what should be the key criteria to use when actually choosing which question to answer. Should it be your favorite topic? If that comes, then you should select it. Should it be the knowledge that you have, your ability? Should it be your own personal comfort level associated with that particular topic? Should it be just random? Well, based on time. Well, out of all of these, I believe none is as important as what you should consider with regard to answering point for marks. So what you should consider when making a choice between questions 3, 4, and 5 as to which should be left out, you should look at the points for marks. Usually, the number of points that you have to make and for the marks that are available, that is what should enable you to come up with a better or a good answer. Now, what this means? This basically means that if it is an ethics question, which is the case over here for question 4, you may be able to come up with a few threats to independence associated with the code of ethics. But can you give enough points to get the marks that are available? So that is to say, for 20 marks, can you actually come up with 20 points to get the 20 marks? So choose a question where you are comfortable giving 20 points, because most of the requirements in section B, in a significant majority of cases, most of the requirements in section B will carry 1 mark, 1 point. So the higher the number of points that you can make, not the number of points, not the quality of points, because quality is more important when it comes to section A, question 1 and 2, where you have to prioritize your points. Certain risks are more adequately need to be described, certain risks need to be put in a lot of thorough details and all. But in section B, what is different is that you just can come up with short sentences and get the 1 mark. You just come up with a procedure or the evidence that is required to be put in the file, as was the case for question 3 over here, and you get the 1 mark. So you do not have to come up with a lot of long descriptions and details with regard to this area. So always consider whether you can actually come up with how many out of the 20 points can you write. If you are doing a question which is not your favorite topic, for example, going concern in this case may not be your favorite topic, and it is in question 5, but the question is structured in a way that all you have to do is just write down the evidences that you would ask from the valuer, that the procedures that you would do, or the evidences you would have to expect in the audit file. It is actually not your favorite topic, but actually a topic that on which you can come up with a lot of points and get easy marks that are available. So I would suggest that look at the points for marks that are available and go for the question which is around an area about which you can come up with many different basically in your analysis section describe how this rule applies to the issue that you just described. And when you're describing the issue, what are you doing? You describe the facts around the issue. You're talking about materiality of the issue, how significant it is. And sometimes other than just quantitative materiality, you want to describe how significant that issue is. So significance of the issue. So here you're talking about description, materiality, significance of the issue. In rule, you're actually kind of referring to, and in some cases, very few, reproducing, but mostly referring to the actual accounting standard or financial reporting standard that is relevant, and which specific requirements of that standard are important, or the law, or the ACCA that is important. This is like your main body. The analysis is the main body of your answer. This is where you are describing what is known as the interconnection. So you're talking about R and I, the rule and the introduction. How does the rule apply to the issue that you just described? So you do the issue, rule, analysis, and then lastly you come up with your conclusion. This is the way to solve these kind of questions, because if you do it, it enables you to come up with a structured answer to the question. Right? So this is something that is important to know. Now, what was question 3 all about? It was on matters to consider and evidence expected to be found in your file. And then there were a 4-mark part B, the action that should be taken regarding the uncorrected misstatement prior to signing your report, which basically required some level of knowledge of ISA 450, which is associated with uncorrected misstatements in the financial statement. Now, what should or how should you have approached the first part of this question? Well, the situation was that the management board had announced plans to cease offering home delivery services. It was a line of business or a segment that was being about to be seized. Since the announcement, all activity related to delivery services stopped. Delivery vehicles have been classified as non-current asset held for sale. Obviously, when you're doing this kind of business, a key asset or a property, plant, equipment item in your statement of financial position is likely to be the motor vehicles, right? So, delivery vehicles have been classified as non-current assets held for sale at 31st March and measured at face value as cost to sell, valued at $1 million. The first thing you want to talk about is whether this issue, what this issue is about, the key areas that are triggered by the key standard requirements that are triggered by this issue, and of course materiality of this issue. So that you come up with a description on how significant this issue is. And as you can see on the answer, and I would also want to open this over here, so let's have a look at the answer here as well on question number 3. And you can open this in the handout section that you have. So you see that the matter, and it comes up with an accounting treatment, and then 1 mark each available associated with the risks and the evidences that you would want to highlight. Right? So it says in evidence 1 mark per piece of evidence. And there are many that you can see in the answer actually. So IFRS 5, non-current asset held for sale and discontinued operation. This is the standard that comes into play, and it is important to note that you are supposed to describe the basic requirements of the standard associated with this scenario, not the other requirements of the standard that would not be relevant over there. So you just make a reference to what IFRS 5 has to say about discontinued operations, how do you present them, what can be the impact on the assets, especially the motor vehicles in this case, since they were being discontinued, the use of those motor vehicles could not be ascertained right now. So what kind of evidence would you expect to see in the file? Also, initially, since after having commented on the materiality, it appears that it is 2.2% of reported revenue and is therefore material. In the prior year, 2.6%. So anything that percentage, of course, is material, 2.2% of revenue. Now, going to the evidence part, you see a lot of things that could have been mentioned, but the key, again, mistake to avoid is don't write procedures. This is not the question asking you for procedures, it's a question that is asking you to provide evidences that you expect to see in the file. So you will not say that perform a confirmation or physically inspect the motor vehicle or obtain the contract of the employment of people who are working in this department to find out if severance has to be paid to them. if they are going to leave the company. And all of these would classify as procedures. So you're not supposed to write this down as procedure, rather you're going to put them down as evidences. And what are you going to write is what you see on the screen: copy of board minutes, analysis of revenue, copies of contract of employment. So rather than saying review the employment contracts to find out if severance has to be paid, you write copy of contract of employment for individuals made redundant to confirm terms of their redundancy payments. Now, against each of the evidences, as you can see on the answer, you're looking at the fact that there is a little more description that has been given. Why? Because the question requirement, if you go to question 3, part A and B, look at the question requirement, then the question requirement is basically explain the audit evidence you should expect to find. Now, how do you explain the evidence? You explain it by providing a purpose of the evidence, that why it would be there in the audit file, or what is the significance of that audit evidence, right? So, this is what you need to do when it says explain. And it is going to be the case most of the time, because whenever it asks you for audit evidence, it's not going to ask you to state the audit evidence or identify the audit evidence, because that is something that is too F level, and you would want to go to the B level, which is, advanced audit and assurance. So they want to come up, they want you to basically think about not just the evidences, but also why those are required, right? So it's more than just the fundamental or basics of what would be in the audit file. On part B, you have explaining the actions the auditor should take regarding uncorrected misstatements. Now, this basically requires an understanding of ISA 450, because all uncorrected misstatements need to be accumulated, and then you have to compare them with your materiality level if they are well above the nominal amount, and of course discuss with management, and if material, with those target governance and ask for adjustment. So that's what you have to do. There's 1 mark available for each point that you make. That is usually the case in all P7 section B questions, and you can see there are many bullets available on the answer. Part C was related to now another totally different issue. It says during your review of the audit file, the following issues were there. There's no signed representation letter in the file, and due to various difficulties, work towards the end of the audit had to be rushed. Because of this, what happened was that the senior instructed the juniors to scale down the sample sizes that had been decided. Now, this is something that is triggering quality control issues. So we go back to what we learned about ISA 220 and, of course, some parts of ISQC 1 as well. But what is more relevant here, whether it's ISQC or ISA 220, it is ISA 220, because it relates to quality control at the individual audit engagement level. And this is what the situation basically is. So you would want to talk a bit about ISA 220. Also, with regard to ISA 570, going concern, because the representation is being obtained from the client, and there is obviously an issue associated with the discontinuance of operations, right? So there is also a problem associated with the sample sizing being reduced, because the sample is already a sample out of the big population, which of course is expected to be representative of the population. Now, if you sample within a sample, or you actually reduce the size of the sample, so what are you actually doing? You're basically reducing the amount of evidence that you're getting, facing high detection risk. So you are basically facing more risk now than the items that you have not sampled. That is to say, the items which are not in the population selected. Well, in that population, there could be now a much bigger misstatement. So that is something that we want to have a look at. Right? So you have the marking scheme here now, matters and evidence, 1 mark per explained point on the home delivery service, and evidences. So there's a long list of evidences, and I'm the description of the ethical threat, why a threat is a threat, how significant is it, and what can you do about it. So that is to say, the safeguards that are available. So for each of these, you come up with short sentences, short paragraphs, and you get 1 mark for each valid point made. And as you can see on the slide in front of you, the screen in front of you, that actually the point that has been made after which each statement, you can see that after each line, 1 mark, 1 mark, 1 mark is written. So that basically tells you that if you describe your answer in such a way that you're giving short paragraphs to point out each one of the matters that you want to describe, that is how you get the 1 marks that are available for each point made. Now, alternatively, since you're in a hurry, you may want to write up all of this together in one big, huge, jumbled up sentences and paragraph, and which basically leaves the examiner in a very difficult situation with regard to how to actually give marks, because, well, there's a chance that not all of the points that you think that you have made will actually be captured and treated as such by the examiner, and that may limit the marks that are available. Some of the situations were fairly simple. So, for example, in the first situation, the person who was the senior in charge had been offered a position of finance director, and of course it would bring into question some ethical issues, but also some professional issues. So this is an important one to consider here, that whenever a question on ethics is set up, do not think that this is a question asking only ethical issues. Kindly read the question comment carefully. Sometimes, in addition to ethical issues, they are basically asking for either professional issues or quality control issues, and very rarely well, but also commercial issues. So it has to be taken into consideration that how much of this could actually become a professional or a quality control issue as well. The second one was a long outstanding client which had a subsidiary, IORA, which made losses for several years, and now you obtain a written representation that goodwill is not impaired. Now you're giving a report, and the firm's auditor's report on financial IORA is unmodified. So the chief CEO, Mr. Charles, is due to retire in 2017 when his share options mature. So there were 2 situations within this, and you have to describe with regard to both of them, and that was also the reason why the highest number of marks were available out of the 4 parts for Shatton Company. So there's 7 marks that are available, right? Now, written representation, whether it is important or not, and how much of it is creating a professional issue, written representation that the goodwill is not impaired must have been necessary, otherwise it should not have been asked for. This means that party loan does not have sufficient other more reliable evidence. Now, this indication that all you obtain is a representation, this is an indication, of course, that there is not much else that is available. And this is actually creating a higher risk for you. So there's a professional issue with regard to your discharging of professional liabilities as regards whether you have taken into account all the relevant facts and circumstances associated with this event or transaction prior to actually signing the audit report. Also, another one here is that with regard to the pressure from Charles. So it says here, and I'm highlighting it here, it is possible that some pressure has been exerted by Charles to encourage the audit partner not to modify the opinion as he's retiring next year, and his share option will presumably be worth less if goodwill was written down. So this could also be written over here. And lastly, an important point that many of you may not actually have thought about, a change in audit senior audit staff and audit manager may be overdue. The unmodified auditor's report should be subject to a code review and any quality control issues raised with the team who conducted the audit. So a code review may be important over here, right? So this is also an important one with regards to professional issue. Although you may want to say that this is actually a quality control issue, but well, as I said earlier, that there is an overlap between quality and professional issues as well, and there can sometimes be overlaps between ethical and professional issues as well. So you have to frame it in a way that it looks like more of a professional issue rather than quality control issues, right? So this is something that is important. We then had the third situation of Pinzon Company, which was threatening to sue the firm for the last year. Pinzon is alleging that Barcelona billed the full rate on airfares for audit staff when substantial discount had been obtained by Barcelona. Now, airfare for this company, what does it imply? Very similar to one of the questions that you saw on the slide when we were covering ethics, that a free air ticket from Dubai to London was being offered to the audit partner, and what would have happened. Now, this is raising basically a lot of concerns, and you should be able to come up with many to get the 5 that are available. In many of these cases in Section B, the target should actually be to get 80 or 90% of the marks that are available. Why? Because all you have to do is come up with points for marks, shorter sentences. You do not have to describe in a lot of detail as compared to section A. So it should be easier to actually get the marks full or close to full marks in section B questions. And the last one related to secondment of staff, which was basically a 3-month secondment. They asked that the audit senior from your team is assigned as he has the knowledge of the finance system. And of course, this was an easy one to explain for 4 marks, and you should be able to get 4 marks by explaining how it creates the self-review threat and the self-trust threat as well. And of course, the way that this could influence the audit decisions that you're making, the key judgments that you're making as part of the audit, and your conclusions with regard to the audit report. So you have the marking scheme in front of you, and you can look at many of these factors. I think the key one here was part B, the Shackle Company, which was worth 7 marks. So there was also the fraud risk over there, the stupidity misstatement, the intimidation threat, many of you may have talked about. Did you talk about familiarity, and did you mention rotation of audit, rotation within the firm, within the staff happening as a possible safeguard? So those are the key questions that we need to ask. Ethics is usually something that appears to be easy, but well, it can be challenging at times. So I would recommend that before you actually make a decision that I'm going to go with ethics because it's my favorite topic, I think you should just be a little bit more patient, read through the question requirement to actually identify whether you have the 20 points available to get the 20 marks in an ethics versus ethics/professional issue/quality issue question. So I think this is important to note that whereas this kind of question number 4 on ethics and professional quality issues is very attractive, you find it enticing, you want to do it because you believe it is your forte, your area of expertise, it actually could end up in a dangerous situation because you may end up just identifying one or a few threats, whereas the points that are available, the marks that are available are actually 6 and 7 or maybe even more marks, and you need to develop on the points further. So I would just want to throw caution to that particular area. One of the questions that you did not, many of you did not like maybe or did not want to do was question number 5, which was covering basically 3 topics, one of which was the main one, and I think this was the reason why many of you may have been discouraged to do it. It was a 14-mark question which was asking you to identify and comment on implication of the matters. There were 2 matters on the report. So you had to mention about the report. Also, since you will be answering this in the context of the new audit reports, so you may want to mention about the key audit matters paragraph. So the key audit matter, which some of these things could be included in, is something that you may want to discuss. Now, looking at from this angle, I think the tutorial note that you see, there was also some aspect on ISI 2410, which we covered the day before yesterday on reviews. So guidance on reviews of interim financial statements was given in ISI 2410. And the standard states that the auditor should plan their work to gather evidence using analytical procedures and inquiries. Those are the 2 basic techniques that you are using. Now, the auditors will perform analytical procedures in order to discover unusual trends and relationships or individual figures in interim financials, which may indicate a material misstatement. So that's some of the theory around ISI 2410, but you were supposed to connect that with the scenario that was given to you, right? And this was related to part C of this question. Now, on part A, there were audit report implications arising out of property, plant, equipment, IAS 16, and also there was a subsequent event under IAS 10 associated for implication on the audit report, you actually have to give implication on that piece of paper that is the audit report. So there you would want to mention the fact that the basis for qualified opinion paragraph needs to be inserted, wherein the basis would have to be described. However, if such a question asks for the implication on the opinion only, then you do not have to do that because they do not get you any marks. So this is something that is important to consider associated with this particular area. Also, there was a small 3-mark question on going concern, which I believe fairly straightforward, explaining implications for if the directors refuse to prepare forecast beyond 30th September 2016, which is just there over there, but you have a projection from 1st October 16 to 30th September 2021. So they are saying that they are basically making a new strategy. Right now they do not have it, they just have the one for 16, so what would you do in such a situation? So basically, of course, this is leading to 1 mark per comment. Assessment is required, of course. Going concern is one of the fundamental principles. This is what you write over here, the rule. Also, that generally the period that is used is 12 months at least, but the foreseeable future can, of course, be much longer than that. And the standard also says that if there is the period that is used is less than 12 months, the auditor should request an extension, which you should do that in this circumstance. The preparation of forecasts should actually aid the assessment as a going concern. It's one of the indicators, it's one of the factors that you use to assess whether you're not or are a going concern. So in this particular case, since this has not been done and the impact is likely to be material, it is going to lead to either a qualified or a disclaimer of opinion. Now, which one would it be? It depends on pervasiveness of the matter. Now, going concern in this particular case, you do not know what the company. There is some financial information available about the company and it sells sports equipment. So, well, it's difficult to comment based on the information available that how much of an adjustment would have to be made if going concern was triggered and the accounts were prepared on a breakup basis. So, based on the fact that it's just material, it would turn up in a qualified opinion, but if it's pervasive, it would end up in a disclaimer. And of course, since it's asked for the impact on the report, you would want to do the basis for qualified or basis for disclaimer opinion, in which you would want to describe the position of this paragraph. Where would you do that? In the audit report. That's immediately after the opinion paragraph, right on top in the audit report. And of course, you would want to describe what is the purpose of that qualification or disclaimer opinion that you are giving. So looking at things this way, I believe that if you had sufficient time and planned well, question 5 was after all not as difficult. And in terms of points for marks that are available and that we could have talked about, well, question 5 was also not a very, let's put it in this way, disadvantageous question. So it is a question that can actually fetch you some good marks. If you apply your mind and some knowledge and you apply the principles of IRAC. So you explain the issue, in which you describe materiality, for example, and significance, and then the rule, the analysis, and the conclusion to this issue. That brings us to the end of discussion around this particular area. However, most of the earlier part of this, as you're aware, was focused on not just this paper, but exam technique in general. So I encourage you strongly to focus on the key exam techniques for question 1 and 2, the bigger questions. Those are the ones that usually take a lot of time. They are challenging. If you do not execute your approach properly in the exam hall for question 1, it leads to a huge problem of time backlog and time pressure. And every extra minute that you're spending on section A is basically the less extra minutes on section B, as well as the increased tension to finish it on time and to be able to complete the paper. And you just saw on one of the Excel files there that failure to complete the paper has been treated as one of the key reasons for failure. So many people who actually fail do so because they are unable to complete the whole paper. So they have not addressed the whole 100 of the marks that are available, and that results in poor marks. Of course, that's also rising from a lot of other factors, for example, poor planning and time management, and the answers not being structured, lots of cutting, unclear handwriting, and all of those things that we just talked about. So try to avoid those common pitfalls. We've talked about a lot of them throughout the last 6 days. It's the 6th day now, and I hope And I believe that you will be able to find out within yourselves what are the key areas for improvement and your key strengths. So I recommend that you build on your key strengths, look at those areas, and to avoid the common pitfalls and problems that we have. Also, again, it's important to highlight the fact that the examiners' reports are there for a reason. I strongly encourage you to, after having gone through each 3-hour question practice that you do, you should actually put a lot of time and effort to solve the question in 3 hours in the first place, and then to read through the examiner's report and the ACCA suggested solutions to find out what was done by the good candidates, what led to failure of the bad candidates, and what are the key pitfalls to avoid. So those are the key messages, and let's have a look at if we have some questions. No questions for now. All right, so let's call it a day. Thank you very much. I hope that this has been a good learning experience for you. If you have any questions or queries, you can contact the ACCA, which can then refer those queries to me, and I will be happy to respond to them. Right, thank you very much. Have a good evening.